What constitutes good leadership, and who should be allowed to lead? These are questions that are being asked throughout the book of Numbers, and in particular in this Torah portion, in which, as I mentioned earlier, Korach and his followers stand up to Moses and challenge the legitimacy of his leadership. Of course, this is on the heels of the Israelites last week panicking and not having confidence in their leaders, not having confidence in the leaders who have sowed panic about the land of Israel, and now they're too afraid to go in. And God has told them they're going to have to wander for 40 years for this lack of leadership. And now there seems to be a lack of trust also in Moses' leadership. That if the 10 spies who went out last week and came back and caused this panic, perhaps Moses is not even fit to lead. And so Korah is able to stir up a crowd. 250 to be exact is what the Torah portion teaches us. Korah and his followers, they challenge Moses when they say this: "You, Moses, have gone too far, for the whole community are holy, all of them, and the eternal in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the congregation?" Moses says, "Okay, you're going to challenge my leadership? I'll call in God to settle this dispute. Tomorrow, you, Korah, and all your company appear before God. You and they, and I'm going to be there, and Aaron will be there, and each of you is going to take a fire pan and lay incense on it. And each of you will bring his fire pan before the eternal God, 200 fire pans." So Korah gathered the whole community against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And then Moses continues to address the community, saying, "Move away from the tents of these wicked fellows and touch nothing that belongs to them. By this you shall know that it was the Eternal who sent me to do all these things, that they are not of my own devising. If these people's death is that of all humankind, if their lot is humankind's common fate, it was not the Eternal who sent me. But if the Eternal, instead of giving them a good long life, does something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all their belongings, you shall know that these fellows have spurned the eternal God." And what happens immediately after Moses gives this speech? Well, many of you know, the ground opens up and Korah and his followers, they all fall into the ground and it closes back up. In 1 second, Moses' leadership is affirmed. But it's not just Moses' leadership that is affirmed, but also Aaron. Moses, of course, has the communal leadership, whereas Aaron wears the crown of the priesthood of spiritual leadership. And his leadership is also affirmed in this week's Torah portion. God says to the community, "Speak to the Israelite people and take from them, from the chieftains of their ancestral houses, one staff for each chieftain of an ancestral house, 12 staffs in all. Inscribe each one's name on his staff, there being one staff for each head of ancestral house. Also inscribe Aaron's name on the staff of Levi. And then take all of the staffs with all of the names of the leaders of the tribes and deposit them in the tent of meeting before the pact, where I meet with you. The staff of the candidate whom I choose," God says, "shall sprout, and I will rid myself of the incessant mutterings of the Israelites against you." So all of the staffs come to the tent of meeting, and lo and behold, Aaron's staff sprouts and produces almond blossoms. Aaron's leadership is affirmed. Today in our world, we see so many struggles with leadership. In some ways, it would be nice if we would know who the real leader is, if the ones who aren't supposed to lead just get swallowed up by the earth. Or the ones who are leaders, their staff would blossom. Looking to see what's happening in Israel, 4 elections and no clear leaders, a coalition government cobbled together from parties that are radically different from each other, and rancor in our own country about who should lead and who's fit to lead. Oh, I really do wish that God would just come and show us the way. It would make it so much easier that if we knew who the legitimate leaders were and the illegitimate leaders are. But of course, we all know that's not how the world works today. And those who claim that the world works this way, don't trust them. Because even the rabbis of old said the world doesn't continue to work that way. God doesn't show us that clearly. We don't rely on miracles to ascertain God's will. Rabbinic tradition teaches that loudly and clearly. So what can we learn from this parsha about leadership? Well, Pirkei Avot sees a very important principle that we learn from our parsha. They said Korach, his questioning of Moses' leadership, as we saw clearly, was illegitimate. But why? What made it illegitimate? I mean, even he says, I'm from the tribe of Levi, so are you. What makes you special? And they answer by teaching this, that arguments for the sake of heaven, machloket l'shem shamayim, these are arguments that will stand the test of time. But arguments that are not for the sake of heaven, like Korach, they will not stand those leaders. So what's a machloket l'shem shamayim? What is an argument for the sake of heaven? Our tradition understands that an argument for the sake of heaven is one that is trying to advance the cause of creating a better society for all. And that Korach, as the rabbi saw him, he was fighting against Moses, not because he cared so much about the Israelite people, but was about his ego, his desire to be the leader. Machloket l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven, on the other hand, are very different. They're about being disagreeable, but not for being disagreeable's sake, not for being the devil's advocates, not for trying to advance our own ego, but that when we as leaders argue, it may be imperfect and messy, but machloket l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven, they are arguments to show us our humility, that we respect people who have different opinions than us. Can you imagine in our world today? That we have empathy, that we listen, not just to talk, but to really understand somebody else's point of view, that we care about the greater good, and that's why we're arguing, because we're hoping that we can grow and we can understand better if we listen to another, and perhaps the solution that we will devise will be one that is better for all. It's not about one's ego, like it was for Korach. Like Aaron's staff, real leaders have the ability to learn and to grow and to continue to blossom. As I was thinking about this Torah portion in leadership, of course, I couldn't help but think about the past 15 months here at Beth Emet. And as I look into the congregation today, people sitting in front of me are people that I've spent a lot of time with in little boxes, in meetings, plan the high holidays. Our COVID task force to figure out what our regulations are going to be. Officers and board meetings, technology. The number of meetings goes on and on and on over the past 15 months. But what was the purpose of all of those meetings? The purpose of those meetings was to lead this congregation with humility, with respect, with caring for the betterment of everyone. And during those meetings, of course, we didn't always agree. We had a variety of approaches. We struggled. There were frustrations along the way. There were mistakes. There were ways in which we stepped on each other's toes because we didn't know quite what we were doing. And the right hand didn't always know what the left hand was doing. And one committee planned something, and oops, another committee planned something the same night. And we had to show a lot of grace to each other and a lot of kindness. And at the same time, we had many machloket l'shem shamayim, arguments with each other, though, for the sake of the betterment of this community. for the sake of our own growth. And I have to say, looking at the people in this congregation, thank you. Thank you for being my interlocutors. Thank you for helping me grow. Thank you for pushing me, even when sometimes I felt frustrated. Because I think that the arguments that we had, the disagreements that we had, led us in so many ways to growing as a community and to being stronger, more compassionate, and more loving. And so my blessing for tonight as we go forth is may we all be like Aaron's staff. May we continue to grow and blossom as a community. And for all of those who are home on Zoom, I want you to think about and take a moment to express your gratitude and appreciation for the people here in the sanctuary that got us to this point, and to know that they are always working l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, for the sake of the good of all of us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Shabbat shalom.